chosen ones. Listen closely, for we have stepped into one of the most structurally unique days of the year. Friday the 13th is not a day of bad luck, but a day of intense spiritual calibration. To navigate this frequency successfully, you must address the one small habit that is currently leaking your power. Before this day reaches its energetic peak, there are variables that simply cannot follow you into the shift. Most people will walk into this window in a state of self-sabotage, unaware that their immediate environment is broadcasting a signal of unfinished business to their subconscious. One small overlooked habit quietly dictates the frequency of your entire operational base. Leaving your physical rest site in a state of disorder, tangled sheets, scattered pillows, is a tactical error. The subliminal signal. A disordered bed is the first visual data point your mind processes upon waking, and the last it sees before offline mode. This visual static subtly informs your brain that your reality is incomplete and unstable. The stability frequency. Making your bed is not an act of discipline in the traditional sense. It is a systemic reset. It is the fastest way to anchor a sense of order and intentionality into your physical space. Atmospheric control. When you reset this singular area, the atmosphere of your home shifts from chaos to calibration. You are telling the universe that you are a sovereign operator who is in control of their coordinates. You cannot expect to master the external global shifts if you have not mastered the first square meter of your reality. Walking into the high vibrational tension of Friday the 13th from a space of order changes the way you perceive the day's challenges. It provides a safe harbor frequency that guards you against the external noise. If you left your rest site in disorder, return and finalize it immediately. Notice how the intentionality of the room changes once the primary visual anchor is straightened. Maintain this small ritual as a baseline for the remainder of the month. As the world feels more chaotic, your base of operations must remain stable. Friday the 13th is a day that separates those who are prepared from those who are reactive. By securing your immediate environment, you ensure that you are the one shaping the tone of your day, rather than allowing the day's superstitions to shape you. Chosen ones, pay close attention to the frequency of this moment. We have reached a critical intersection where your environment no longer dictates your path. Your internal alignment does. There is a deceptive habit that many of you are carrying into this 13th day of March, and it is the most dangerous form of self-sabotage. Ignoring the truth you already possess. Deep in the marrow of your soul, you already know the direction you are meant to take. You know which door needs to be closed and which path requires your footprints. Yet, you treat this divine signal like a mere suggestion, a proposal that requires the approval of the matrix or the confirmation of others. Hear me clearly. Intuition is almost always the first answer your mind tries to argue with. The moment that quiet internal signal arrives, the ego immediately begins to bargain, to overthink, and to delay. You wait for a phone call, a sign, or a permission slip from someone else to validate what the great architect has already whispered to your spirit. When you ignore that first instinct, you invite unnecessary complexity into your field. This is why your life feels exhausting right now. Decisions drag on for months when they should have been settled in seconds. Simple choices become draining internal debates. Situations feel confusing, not because you lack information, but because you are resisting the truth you already hold. The habit of doubting yourself is a frequency leak. It is a portal that allows the opinions of the unawakened to colonize your mind. Before this day unfolds any further, you must drop the habit of seeking outside counsel for an inside job. That quiet sense of direction is not a maybe, it is your compass. It is far clearer and more accurate than any external opinion you could ever gather. The signal is active, like this transmission right now, to signal to the universe that you are done bargaining with your own truth. Subscribe and turn on the bell, In this window of 2026, the speed of the shift is increasing. You cannot afford the delay of doubt. This channel is your anchor. In the comments below, type, "I trust myself," to seal this frequency. Declare that you are no longer waiting for permission to follow your own light. If this channel has helped you find the courage to stop arguing with your own intuition, you can support me with a cup of coffee, because every seed you release becomes a river that reaches souls you may never meet. The donation link is waiting for you in the description, pinned in the comments and shown as a QR code in this video. Your support is a powerful energetic signature confirming your mastery over your own internal guidance. Stop treating your wisdom like a question. It is an answer. The direction is clear, chosen one. Stop asking the world for the map you already have in your hand. The moment you cease to interrogate your own mental clarity, you begin to observe a fascinating phenomenon regarding days shrouded in myth, like Friday the 13th. For generations, the collective consciousness has been socially engineered to perceive this specific date as an omen of negativity. Through the relentless influence of cinema, Gothic folklore, and inherited cultural anxieties, we have reinforced the narrative that this day is a magnet for misfortune or inexplicable anomalies. Because of this deep-seated psychological conditioning, a vast majority of people cross the threshold of their homes already bracing for impact, subconsciously beckoning failure. When a person greets the sunrise with an expectation of chaos, their mind hyper-focuses on finding evidence to support that fear. A minor technological glitch is no longer just a nuisance. It becomes a symbolic warning. A brief delay in a response becomes a harbinger of rejection. Even the most mundane, everyday obstacles are suddenly transformed into undeniable proof that the superstition holds power. Yet, in the cold light of objective reality, nothing extraordinary is typically occurring. The mind is merely sifting through existence using a corrupted filter of bad luck. Our internal expectations sculpt our external experiences far more profoundly than the numbers on a calendar grid ever could. When an individual wakes up convinced the day will be a spiraling wreck, they become hypersensitive to every trivial inconvenience. Their cognitive resources lock onto perceived threats rather than hidden opportunities. Conversely, if one approaches the day with a sense of neutrality or even personal empowerment, the entire texture of their lived experience shifts. Instead of flinching at every shadow, they remain anchored, calm, and observant. They navigate the hours with a lucidity that allows them to make superior decisions and bypass the self-inflicted stress that plagues others. This fundamental shift in perspective reveals a vital truth. The intrinsic meaning of a day rarely originates from the calendar itself. It is birthed from the specific attitude a person injects into it. If you hunt for problems, your brain will provide a bountiful harvest of them. If you hunt for clarity, you will discover doors where others see walls. The day is a static variable. The mindset is the only thing that truly changes. Once you stop viewing Friday the 13th as a red flag, you begin to treat it as a rare invitation for heightened awareness. And it is precisely this awareness that illuminates a specific destructive habit that most people never think to question. A significant portion of the population meticulously constructs their entire identity around the performance of being a good person. They harbor a desperate underlying need to be validated as kind, altruistic, endlessly patient, and perpetually understanding. At a surface level, this appears to be a noble pursuit, as empathy and compassion are the cornerstones of a functioning society. However, a quiet rot begins to set in when the preservation of that curated image becomes more important than authentic existence. When someone is obsessed with being perceived as virtuous by the outside world, they inevitably begin to edit, redact, and censor vital parts of their own soul. They stifle their frustration even when it is entirely justified. They retreat from healthy conflict because they are terrified of being labeled as difficult or uncooperative. They suppress the raw, jagged emotions that might make them appear less agreeable to the masses. Over time, this creates an unbearable internal pressure to constantly manage the perceptions of others. Rather than responding honestly to the complexities of life, they begin performing a sterilized version of themselves designed to fit the narrow expectations of their social circle. They offer plastic smiles while their insides are churning with irritation. They remain silent when their spirit is screaming to speak up. They nod in agreement even when every fiber of their being is signaling dissent. The tragedy of this habit is that it slowly severs the connection to one's own primal instincts. Instead of acting from a place of core truth, they act from a place of brand management. This leads to a dangerous passivity, where they tolerate the intolerable and remain mute on the issues that actually demand their voice. This desperate need to maintain the good person identity often takes root in the early soil of childhood. Many are taught that being agreeable is the only reliable currency for earning love and protection. They become the dependable one, the peacemaker, the child who never makes waves. But in the theater of adulthood, that role becomes a claustrophobic prison that limits their true potential. While the masses cower before the shadow of Friday the 13th, there exists a small group of people who actually anticipate it with a sense of quiet thrill. Rather than interpreting the day as an alarm, they use it as a strategic pivot point to move differently through the world. The logic is remarkably simple. When a day possesses a reputation for being unconventional, it provides a psychological loophole that allows people to drop the exhausting pretense of predictable behavior. It acts as a circuit breaker for the repetitive loops of routine thinking. Suddenly, the day doesn't feel like a weary photocopy of yesterday. This subtle mental shift can radically alter the trajectory of a person's decision-making process. Someone who has been paralyzing themselves with over-analysis regarding a career move might suddenly find the courage to pull the trigger. An individual who has been dodging a difficult conversation for months might finally find the words. A person who has been harboring a secret ambition might finally take that first, terrifying step they had been delaying indefinitely. The day serves as a psychological permission slip, authorizing them to deviate from their established scripts, because the day itself is already perceived as an anomaly. They become more daring, more willing to step outside the ossified patterns of their daily grind. The true power of any given day resides in the narrative we choose to attach to it. If you believe the day is cursed, you will move with a hesitant, stuttering caution, second-guessing your every move. But if you view the day as a window of opportunity for bold action, your attention recalibrates toward a completely different horizon. Instead of scanning for landmines, you start noticing dormant possibilities that you would typically ignore during a normal Tuesday. Many people who embrace this philosophy end up having some of their most productive and transformative days on Friday the 13th. They bypass the mental friction of overthinking and simply surge forward. The unusual reputation of the date actually liberates them from the heavy psychological anchors that usually slow them down. When you break even one stagnant pattern, you generate a momentum that can change your entire life. Instead of fearing the date, they use it as a catalyst to create movement in places where there was previously only hesitation. When a person becomes truly awake to the rhythms of their own life, something microscopic yet profound begins to change in how they perceive ordinary moments. They start detecting patterns that most people walk right through without ever realizing they were under their feet. These patterns aren't cinematic or mystical. They aren't some grand cosmic secret. More often than not, they manifest through the most mundane, everyday scenarios that suddenly radiate a piercing, unexpected clarity. You might be engaged in a trivial water cooler conversation when a single offhand sentence suddenly makes a decade of confusion click into place. Perhaps it is a problem you have been chewing on for weeks, and in one quiet, unprompted moment, you finally understand exactly what has been bothering you. At other times, it happens in the cathedral of solitude. An idea about your future might surface that completely reframes a past failure. A thought might emerge that connects disparate pieces of your biography in a way you had never seen before. Suddenly, a situation that felt like a tangled knot begins to look like a straight line.
These realizations are often quiet and small, yet they carry the weight of an earthquake. The most intriguing part is that these flashes of insight aren't reserved for special dates. They are happening constantly, like a broadcast you've forgotten to tune into. The reason most people miss them is that their attention is fragmented across a dozen different screens and responsibilities. They are sprinting from one task to the next, checking notifications, obsessing over the future, and rarely granting themselves the stillness required to register what is actually happening in the present. For instance, an employee might hear a passing comment from a colleague that suddenly confirms a deep, unspoken intuition about their career path. Another person might experience a moment of silence where they finally realize why a specific relationship has been siphoning their vitality. Someone else might recognize that a risk they were terrified of is actually the most logical next step. None of this is magic. It is simply the result of conscious awareness catching up to the vast amount of data the subconscious mind has been silently processing in the dark. Your mind is a master of pattern recognition. It sees how situations repeat, and it knows when you are out of alignment long before you do. But those observations stay buried until you create a moment of stillness for them to rise. This is why intentionality is so vital on days like today. If you approach the day with the curiosity of an explorer rather than the fear of a victim, you will find yourself noticing the variables you've been blind to for years. A standard conversation becomes a fountain of insight. A quiet moment alone becomes a laboratory for a life-altering realization. If today offers you one of those moments, your only job is to acknowledge it. You don't need to analyze it into dust or make a life-changing decree immediately. Sometimes, the only value of an insight is the peace that comes from finally understanding something that used to be confusing. And once you start paying attention to these subtle signals, you begin to uncover something even more fundamental about your own nature. You start seeing the invisible stories you have been telling yourself about who you are. Every human being carries a backpack full of past experiences that have molded their edges. Rejection, betrayal, loss, and disappointment are the universal taxes of existence. These events leave psychological scars, and acknowledging them is a critical step in self-mapping. Painful chapters often provide the most rigorous lessons on trust, boundaries, and personal resilience. They reveal our non-negotiables and highlight strengths we never knew we possessed. But a strange phenomenon often occurs in the wake of these experiences. Instead of treating the wound, learning from the incident and moving on, many people begin to weave their entire identity into the fabric of the injury. Neutral situations are suddenly perceived as threats. A minor disagreement with a partner is interpreted as a precursor to total betrayal. A delay in a text message triggers an ancient fear of abandonment. The mind begins to see the vibrant, new colors of the present through the gray, dusty lens of old trauma. Your wounds are undeniably a part of your history, but they were never intended to be your permanent address. This distinction is the thin line between stagnation and evolution. When a person lives from their wounds, they are perpetually walking backward into the future. Their energy is entirely consumed by a defensive crouch, trying to prevent the past from repeating itself. Their choices are dictated by a fear of pain rather than a hunger for possibility.
But when you integrate those experiences,
rather than being defined by them, everything changes. The trauma is converted into data. It becomes wisdom regarding what you value, what you deserve, and the kind of architecture you want for your life. The past remains, but it no longer holds the remote control to your present emotions. For example, a person who was once betrayed may initially see every conflict as a sign that history is destined to repeat. But as they heal, they learn to separate the ghost of the past from the person standing in front of them. They recognize when a situation is actually toxic and when their mind is simply reacting to an old, outdated memory. When you shed the identity of being a wounded person, you experience a lightness that feels almost like levitation. The past is still a chapter in your book, but it is no longer the title on the cover. Once that shift occurs, a new realm of existence opens up. You stop living in a reactive state and begin living with the surgical intention of a creator. That is the exact point where genuine growth takes flight. The impulse to help others is traditionally viewed as one of the highest human virtues. However, there is a subtle, dangerous threshold where helping ceases to be a gift and starts to become a compulsion, a way to avoid one's own internal emptiness. Some people feel an overwhelming, almost pathological responsibility to fix every fractured situation in their orbit. When a stranger complains, they immediately provide a checklist of solutions. When a friend falters, they feel a crushing obligation to carry them. When there is a hint of tension in a room, they take it upon themselves to act as the emotional janitor, sweeping away the discomfort. Over time, this cements a pattern where they become the designated fixer for everyone they know. In the beginning, this role provides a potent hit of dopamine. It makes them feel essential, powerful, and profoundly useful. But slowly, the weight begins to crush them. They start absorbing the radioactive stress and the heavy burdens of others without even realizing they have become a human sponge for problems that aren't theirs. One of the primary reasons this dynamic persists is that their sense of self-worth has become parasitically attached to their utility. They only feel valuable when they are solving a crisis. If no one is in need of their intervention, they feel a terrifying restlessness, as if they have no purpose without someone else's dysfunction to focus on. They continue to insert themselves into situations that don't belong to them, often robbing the other person of the struggle necessary for their own growth. The desperate need to be needed is one of the most effective traps ever devised. What makes this even more insidious is that it creates a stagnant loop. The helper keeps fixing, the helped keeps breaking, and neither party ever actually evolves. One remains eternally dependent, while the other remains perpetually exhausted by a responsibility they were never meant to carry. Most people will wake up on this Friday the 13th and move through the world with the exact same momentum they had yesterday. Their physical spaces will remain cluttered, their schedules will remain a chaotic blur of reactive habits, and their attention will be hijacked by the same 10 distractions. They will never pause to ask why they do what they do. They will carry the same mental and physical baggage into the new day, and when nothing magical happens, they will shrug and say that the day was just another Friday. But the people who take even a few intentional steps before the day begins will experience a different reality. Their environment will feel lighter because they took the time to clear the physical manifestations of chaos. Their minds will feel sharper because they prioritized rest and disconnected from the digital noise. Their day will feel like a deliberate choice rather than a series of accidents, because they removed the small, invisible sources of friction that usually drain their energy. And if you are still here, observing these thoughts, I want you to know how much I appreciate your presence. It is a rare thing to choose to spend your attention in this way. Remember, Friday the 13th is not a day of shadows or superstitions. It is merely a blank canvas, a moment to recalibrate your internal compass, to shed the weight of expectations that were never yours to carry, and to move forward with a renewed sense of lightness. As the day unfolds, walk into it with a quiet, unshakable confidence. You have nothing to prove to anyone, and there is no need to rush toward an invisible finish line. Simply navigate the hours with a lucidity of mind and a steady, deliberate pace. Often, the days that the world fears the most are the ones that possess the secret power to move us toward the life we were always meant to live.